Leah's heart pounded as she ran through the empty streets, clutching the envelope in her trembling hands. The eviction notice inside felt heavier than her entire world. She had nowhere to go. No job, no savings, and now, no home. Her breath hitched as she rounded a corner and crashed straight into a man. Strong hands caught her before she hit the ground. "Watch where you're going," a deep voice rumbled. She looked up and froze. It was him, T. Aney, the billionaire CEO. The same man who, just hours ago, had dismissed her from the company's lobby as a mere errand girl. Now, his piercing gaze locked onto hers, not with annoyance, but with something else. Interest. Calculation. "You're the girl who got fired today," he murmured, tilting his head. Leah swallowed hard, gripping her envelope tighter. I didn't mean to." "How much do you need?" he cut in. She blinked in shock. What? He pulled out a sleek black card from his wallet and held it between his fingers. "How much to make you my wife?" Leah's breath caught. Surely, she had misheard. But when she looked into his cold, unreadable eyes, she knew. He was serious. And her answer would change her life forever. Leah stood frozen, her mind struggling to process the words that had just left Aney's lips. How much to make you my wife? Surely, she had misheard. Or maybe this was some kind of twisted joke. She stared at him, searching his face for any sign of amusement, but there was none. His expression remained unreadable, his dark eyes locked onto hers as if he had already decided her fate. The sleek black card between his fingers gleamed under the dim city lights. The same card that held more money than she had ever seen in her life. Her heart pounded. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Are you serious?" T exhaled sharply, slipping the card back into his wallet. "Look, I don't have time for games. You need money. I need a wife. It's a simple business arrangement." Leah's grip on the eviction notice tightened. Just this morning, she had been struggling to scrape together enough for a single meal. And now, a billionaire was standing in front of her, offering her a way out of her misery. A way out that came with a dangerous price. "I don't understand," she said, shaking her head. You're rich. You could marry anyone you want. Why would you need a fake wife?" T's jaw clenched slightly, as if her question irritated him. "That's none of your concern. Just know that if you say yes, I'll take care of everything. Your debts, your home, your future. All you have to do is be my wife, for 6 months. Leah's chest tightened. 6 months. A small voice in her head screamed at her to walk away, to not get tangled up in something she didn't understand. But another voice, the louder one, reminded her that she had nothing left to lose. She glanced at the eviction notice again, her stomach twisting. It wasn't just about her. She had people depending on her. Her younger brother, still in school. The medical bills piling up from her late mother's hospital stay. She needed this. But could she really go through with it? T seemed to sense her hesitation. He sighed and ran a hand through his thick, dark hair. "Fine. You need time to think. But don't take too long. My offer won't stay on the table forever." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the city. Leah stood there for a long time, her heart racing. She had been given a choice. And by morning, she would have to decide whether to accept a deal that could either save her life or destroy it. Leah barely slept that night. She lay on the thin mattress in her tiny, windowless apartment, staring at the cracks on the ceiling. The city outside was still alive, the distant hum of cars and voices filtering through the walls. But inside, her world was silent. Heavy. T's words echoed in her mind. "You need money. I need a wife. It's a simple business arrangement." Her fingers traced the worn edges of the eviction notice beside her. Tomorrow morning, her landlord would come knocking. And she had nothing to offer. Nothing but herself. The idea of selling herself, even if only in name, made her stomach twist. Marriage, fake or not, wasn't something she had ever imagined for herself. She had spent her whole life scraping by, doing odd jobs, running errands, and keeping her head down. And now, she was supposed to walk into the life of the most powerful man in the city? She sighed, turning onto her side. Her younger brother's face flashed in her mind. Nathan. 17, bright-eyed, still hopeful about the world despite everything they had been through. He had no idea how bad things had gotten. Leah had made sure of that. But soon, she wouldn't be able to protect him anymore. If she didn't come up with the money, Nathan would be forced to drop out of school. He would end up just like her, stuck in a cycle of poverty with no way out. Her throat tightened. Maybe this was the way out. Maybe Annie, arrogant and cold as he was, had thrown her a lifeline. Her pulse quickened at the thought. She barely knew him. What if he changed his mind? What if there were hidden conditions in the contract? What if? No. She shook the thoughts away. It wasn't like she had any other options. She reached for her phone with trembling fingers. T had given her his number before walking away, a simple message saved in her inbox. You know where to find me. She hesitated only for a second before pressing call. The phone rang once, twice. Then, a deep voice answered. You've made your decision. It wasn't a question. Leah swallowed. Yes. Silence stretched between them. Then, T exhaled, as if he had already expected this. Meet me tomorrow. My office. 10 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. The call ended before she could respond. Leah stared at her phone, her heart hammering. It was done. She had made her choice. And there was no turning back. Leah stood in front of the massive glass skyscraper, her stomach twisting into knots. The Annie Corporation headquarters towered over the city, a symbol of power and wealth. People in expensive suits walked past her, entering through the grand revolving doors without a second glance. She inhaled sharply. She didn't belong here. Her reflection on the glass entrance showed exactly how out of place she was. An oversized second-hand blazer, a cheap handbag with fraying straps, and scuffed shoes. But she wasn't here to fit in. She was here to survive. Leah squared her shoulders and stepped inside. The lobby was vast, lined with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. The receptionist barely looked up from her computer. Do you have an appointment? Leah cleared her throat. I'm here to see Mr. Annie. He's expecting me. The receptionist's gaze flicked over her, skepticism clear in her eyes. But after a quick phone call, she nodded. Take the private elevator to the top floor. He's waiting. Leah's heart pounded as she stepped into the sleek elevator. The doors slid shut, and the numbers on the screen climbed higher and higher until, ding, the doors opened to reveal an office so large it could have been an entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city skyline. The air smelled of expensive leather and cologne. And there he was. Annie stood near his desk, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, his hands in his pockets. His expression was unreadable as he watched her step inside. You came. Leah forced herself to meet his gaze. I said I would. He nodded once, then gestured to a polished table. A thick stack of papers sat neatly on top. This is the contract. Leah hesitated before walking over. She skimmed through the first few pages, her hands shaking slightly. Terms of agreement. The marriage will last 6 months. Leah must accompany T to all social events and public appearances. No interference in personal matters. No romantic expectations. A payment, $500,000. A breach of contract will result in legal consequences. She swallowed hard. The amount of money was staggering. Enough to change her life. Enough to save Nathan. Do you have any questions? T's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. Leah looked up. Why me? T studied her for a moment. Because you need this as much as I do. His words sent a chill down her spine. He wasn't wrong. Taking a deep breath, Leah reached for the pen. Her fingers trembled slightly as she signed her name. The moment the ink dried, T extended his hand. Congratulations, he said smoothly. You're now my wife. Leah placed the pen down, her heartbeat a frantic rhythm in her chest. She had done it. She had just sold herself to the most dangerous man in the city. And she had no idea what she had just stepped into. Leah barely had time to process what she had done before T was already giving orders. Pack your things, he said, moving toward his desk. You'll be staying at my penthouse from now on. Leah's breath caught. What? T didn't even look up. We have to make this believable. The media will be watching. I can't have my wife living in a rundown apartment, Leah clenched her fists. She knew this was part of the deal, but hearing him say it so coldly made her stomach twist. Still, she had no choice. A black car was already waiting for her outside. Within an hour, her entire life had been packed into a single suitcase. The penthouse. Leah followed T into the penthouse, her mouth falling open in shock. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. The entire space bathed in the glow of expensive chandeliers. The furniture was sleek and modern, everything in neutral tones with sharp edges. It felt cold, lifeless, just like the man who owned it. T loosened his tie, walking over to the bar. "There are 2 rules you need to follow while you're here," he said, pouring himself a drink. "First, stay out of my way. Second, don't ask questions." Leah narrowed her eyes. "I didn't sign up to be a prisoner." T smirked, taking a sip of his whiskey. "No, you signed up to be my wife. And wives live with their husbands." His words sent a chill down her spine. Before she could respond, the doorbell rang. T frowned, setting down his drink. "Stay here," he ordered before striding toward the door. Leah's pulse quickened as she heard a familiar voice. A woman's voice. "T, darling, why are you avoiding me?" Leah's heart sank. She knew that voice. Vanessa, the woman who had been all over the tabloids, the one rumored to be T's on-again, off-again lover. T's voice was low, irritated. "Vanessa, I told you." "Who is she?" Vanessa's voice turned sharp. Leah stiffened. She had been seen. A moment later, Vanessa stormed into the room, her piercing blue eyes locking onto Leah like a predator spotting prey. T exhaled through his nose, clearly annoyed. "Vanessa, leave." Vanessa ignored him, stepping closer to Leah with a slow, assessing gaze. "So," she said, tilting her head, "this is the girl you married?" She let out a laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. "You expect me to believe that you, T. Annie, married this?" Leah's hands curled into fists. T's jaw tensed. "I don't care what you believe." Vanessa turned back to Leah, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "Tell me, darling, how much did he pay you?" Leah's blood ran cold. T stepped forward suddenly, his voice like ice. "Enough, Vanessa." But Vanessa didn't back down. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper only Leah could hear. "Enjoy your little fairy tale while it lasts," she murmured. "Because trust me, it won't." Then, with one final glance at T, she turned and strode out of the penthouse, her heels clicking against the marble floor. The moment the door shut, tension filled the air. Leah exhaled shakily, her heart pounding. T didn't look at her as he picked up his drink again. "Get used to it," he said flatly. "People like Vanessa will always doubt you." Leah swallowed hard. "And what about you?" For the first time that night, he met her gaze. Something dark flickered in his eyes. "I don't need to doubt you," he said quietly, "because this isn't real." His words felt like a slap. Leah clenched her jaw, forcing herself to look away. She had just entered a world where love was nothing but a game, and she was playing against people who had already decided she would lose. Leah barely had time to recover from Vanessa's cruel words before T made another announcement. "We have a gala to attend tomorrow night." She blinked. "What?" T set his glass down, watching her with his usual detached expression. "A charity gala. High profile. The entire business world will be there. It'll be our first public appearance as husband and wife." Leah's stomach twisted. Public. That meant cameras, journalists, scrutiny. She wasn't ready for this. "But," she hesitated, glancing down at her worn-out clothes, "I don't have anything to wear." T waved a dismissive hand. "That's already been taken care of. My assistant will send a stylist in the morning." He spoke as if it was a simple transaction, as if transforming her into the perfect billionaire's wife was no more complicated than ordering coffee. Leah swallowed the lump in her throat. This was real now. There was no going back. The makeover. By morning, a team of professionals arrived at the penthouse, and Leah found herself seated in front of a massive vanity mirror as a stylist examined her with a critical eye. The woman muttered, running a manicured finger along Leah's jawline. You're naturally pretty, but we'll need to refine your look. Refine. Lia bit her tongue, resisting the urge to roll her eyes. For the next few hours, she was poked, prodded, and transformed. Her long, unruly hair was tamed into soft, elegant waves. Her nails were polished to perfection. The dress, a stunning black gown, fit her like a second skin, hugging her curves in all the right places. When she finally saw her reflection, she barely recognized herself. She looked like them, like she belonged in Tiani's world. But she didn't. The gala. The moment they stepped into the grand ballroom, all eyes turned to them. Leah's heart pounded as whispers rippled through the crowd. She could feel the judgment in their gazes, the silent disbelief. T, however, was completely unfazed. His grip tightened around her waist, pulling her closer as he leaned in. "Smile," he murmured against her ear, "or they'll eat you alive." Leah forced a smile, her face aching from the effort. Flashbulbs exploded as cameras captured their every move. Journalists swarmed, eager for a statement from the man who had suddenly and inexplicably gotten married. "Mr. Aney, how does it feel to be a married man? Who is your wife? Where did she come from? Rumors say this marriage is just for show. How do you respond?" Leah stiffened, but T remained effortlessly composed. He smirked, pulling her even closer. "Rumors are just that, rumors," he said smoothly. "My wife and I are very much in love." Then, before she could react, he tilted her chin up and kissed her. Leah's breath caught. It wasn't a soft, hesitant kiss. It was calculated, firm, a performance. The crowd gasped. The cameras flashed. And Leah realized in that moment that this was her life now, trapped in a perfect illusion. And she wasn't sure if she would ever escape. Leah's lips still tingled from the unexpected kiss, but she didn't have time to process it. The moment T pulled away, the cameras erupted in a frenzy, flashing like 1,000 tiny explosions. She felt lightheaded, not from the kiss itself, but from the weight of what it meant. This was their first public test as a couple, and she had passed. T smirked slightly, his hand still resting on the small of her back. He leaned in just enough for the cameras to catch his next words. "That wasn't so bad, was it?" Leah's fingers dug into her clutch, but she forced a sweet smile. "I suppose I should thank you for the warning." His eyes gleamed with amusement. "Where's the fun in that?" Before she could respond, a voice cut through the chatter. "T. So, it's true. You finally settled down." Leah turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man striding toward them. He was just as impeccably dressed as T, but there was something more dangerous about him. His smile didn't reach his eyes. T's entire posture stiffened. His grip on Leah tightened, just for a second. "Victor," T said flatly. "Victor." Leah recognized the name immediately. Victor Renzo, CEO of Renzo Enterprises, a rival company that had been competing with Aney Corporation for years. Leah swallowed. She had heard whispers about him before. How he wasn't just a businessman, but a man with dangerous connections. Victor's gaze flickered to her, curiosity flashing across his sharp features. And this must be the lucky woman who tamed the city's most eligible bachelor. He extended a hand toward her. "Victor Renzo, a pleasure to meet you." Leah hesitated before shaking his hand. His grip was firm, controlled. "The pleasure is mine," she said politely. Victor's smirk widened. "I have to say, I'm surprised. I didn't think T was the marrying type." T's jaw tightened. "People change." Victor chuckled, but there was an edge to it. "Do they?" His gaze lingered on Leah for a moment longer before he turned back to T. "Well, congratulations. I'll be keeping an eye on you two. Let's see if this marriage of yours lasts." With that, he strolled away, disappearing into the crowd. Leah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. What was that about? T's expression was unreadable. "Nothing you need to worry about." Leah frowned. He didn't seem like just another businessman. T's gaze darkened. "That's because he's not." Something about the way he said it sent a chill down her spine. Who exactly had she married? And what kind of war was she unknowingly stepping into? Leah couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that had settled in her chest after meeting Victor Renzo. He wasn't just a businessman. There was something darker about him, something that made T's cool, composed demeanor crack for just a second. When they returned to the penthouse after the gala, Leah barely said a word. The flashing lights, the fake smiles, it was all too much, too overwhelming. T walked ahead of her, his tall figure silhouetted against the soft glow of the city lights outside the windows. He didn't seem bothered at all. "Relax," he said as he entered the living room, glancing over his shoulder. "You did well tonight. You played your part perfectly." Leah stopped in the doorway, folding her arms. "I don't think you're being entirely honest with me, T." His eyes flicked to hers, sharp and calculating. "What do you mean?" "Victor," Leah said, her voice firm despite the knot in her stomach. "Who is he really?" T sighed, sitting down on the leather couch and leaning back. "Just a rival. A man who wants to tear down everything my family has built." Leah's brows furrowed. "That doesn't explain why he seemed so familiar with you, and why he made that comment about keeping an eye on us." T remained silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the glass of whiskey in his hand. "Victor and I go way back," he said at last, his voice low, almost like he was talking to himself. "We were friends once, business partners. But somewhere along the way, everything changed. He grew more ruthless, greedier, and now, he's obsessed with taking me down." Leah crossed the room and sat across from him, studying his face. "But why didn't you say anything? Why is it such a secret?" T's eyes flickered to hers, and for the first time, she saw a hint of something in his expression, something vulnerable. "Because if you knew, it would make you a target too." Leah's heart skipped a beat. "A target?" "Victor doesn't play by the rules," T said, his voice colder now. "He's willing to destroy anyone and anything to get what he wants. And I won't let him use you against me." The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy blanket. She had walked into this marriage to survive, to escape her past. But she had no idea that she was now caught in a battle between two men who would stop at nothing to claim victory. And she was just a pawn. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken tension. Leah sat there, staring at T, trying to process the gravity of what he had just said. T wasn't just a powerful CEO with a reputation to protect. He was a man with enemies, with secrets, and with a history that clearly ran deep. But the more Leah thought about it, the more she realized she didn't know anything about him. "Not really. I don't know if I'm just supposed to trust you because you tell me to," Leah said, her voice barely a whisper. "I need to know more. About Victor. About everything." T didn't meet her eyes. He stared into his glass, swirling the whiskey as if he could lose himself in its amber depths. "You want to know about Victor? Fine." His voice was icy, detached, like the words didn't matter. "Victor and I, we didn't always hate each other. At one point, we were a team, but we had different ideas, different goals. He wanted power. I wanted control." He paused, a bitter laugh escaping him. "We had our falling out, and he tried to take over the company. I fought back. I won. And since then, he's been trying to ruin me at every turn." Leah leaned forward, her curiosity growing. "But why go after me? Why involve me in this?" T's eyes met hers then, dark, calculating, like he was assessing whether or not to reveal more. "Because you're the one thing I have that he doesn't," he said quietly. "You're the one thing he can't take from me." Leah felt her heart race. "What do you mean?" He leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Victor is good at manipulating people. He uses whatever he can to get leverage. But he doesn't know you, Leah. He doesn't know how much you mean to me." For a moment, Leah felt a flicker of warmth, but it was quickly extinguished by the doubt that followed. "How much I mean to you," she repeated, unsure if she should be flattered or wary. T's eyes darkened, and he leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't mistake what we have. This marriage isn't real. But the things we've built together, our reputation, the company, those things matter. And I won't let anyone destroy them, especially not Victor." Leah swallowed hard. She wasn't sure if he was protecting her, using her, or both. But she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't trust him completely. Not yet. The days after the gala were a blur of business meetings, camera flashes, and never-ending social obligations. Leah found herself slipping further into the role she was supposed to play. T's dutiful wife, always by his side, always smiling, always perfect. But inside, she was unraveling. Every time she looked at him, she wondered if she was just a pawn in a much larger game. Was he really trying to protect her, or was she nothing more than a tool to solidify his empire? The truth was, she didn't know. And with each passing day, the uncertainty gnawed at her. The unseen threat. One evening, as she sat alone in the penthouse, staring out over the city lights, she received an unexpected message. It was a simple text, but the words made her blood run cold. "I know what you're doing." There was no name attached, no indication of who had sent it, but Leah's gut told her it was someone who knew too much. Her mind raced. Who would send her something like this? The answer came quickly: Victor. He had been watching them, lurking in the shadows, just waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Leah's fingers trembled as she typed a response. "What do you want?" The reply came almost instantly. "You." Leah's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just about business rivalry anymore. Victor wanted more than that. The confrontation. The next day, Leah tried to act normal, though her nerves were frayed. She had to know the truth. At dinner that evening, she confronted T, sitting across from him with a determined look on her face. "I need to know what's really going on, T." T raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by her sudden boldness. "What do you mean?" "Victor," she said, leaning forward. "He's been messaging me, and I want to know why." The air between them thickened. T's smile faltered for a brief moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "You shouldn't be dealing with him," T warned, his voice low. "Victor is dangerous. He doesn't play by the same rules as the rest of us." Leah crossed her arms, refusing to back down. "Why me, T? Why does he care about me?" T's eyes hardened. He didn't answer right away, his gaze shifting toward the window, as if weighing his options. Finally, after a long silence, he spoke. "He wants to break me. You're just a means to an end." Leah felt a cold pit form in her stomach. "So, I'm nothing but a pawn?" T's jaw clenched. "It's not like that." He leaned forward, meeting her eyes with a hard intensity. "You're more than that. But you have to understand, this isn't just about us anymore. This is about survival." Leah recoiled, her chest tightening. "And what happens when the game ends, T? What happens when Victor gets what he wants?" T didn't answer. His silence spoke volumes. The breaking point. That night, as Leah lay awake in bed, the weight of her thoughts crushed her. She had come to the city with hopes of building a better life. But now, she was caught in a web of lies, power struggles, and dangerous games. Victor was a real threat. She couldn't ignore that any longer. But the question remained, who could she trust? T? Or would he, too, be swept up in the chaos, leaving her to fend for herself? The next morning, Leah decided to take matters into her own hands. She needed answers, and she was done waiting for T to give them to her. After a quick breakfast, she left the penthouse, not telling anyone where she was going. Her first stop, Renzo Enterprises. Leah's heart pounded as she made her way through the streets of the city, the towering buildings surrounding her like looming giants. She had spent weeks hiding behind the facade of the perfect wife, playing the role she had been thrust into. But today, she couldn't stay silent any longer. Her destination was clear: Renzo Enterprises. Victor Renzo's empire. The rivalry between Victor and T had consumed her thoughts for days, and she was done being in the dark. She needed to understand the full extent of the threat. She needed to know how deep the betrayal ran. It didn't take long for her to reach the sleek, modern building that housed Renzo Enterprises. The towering glass structure seemed to mock her as she stood before it, its cold exterior gleaming in the sunlight. Taking a deep breath, Leah walked through the revolving doors, her nerves bubbling beneath her calm exterior. Inside, the polished floors and expensive artwork made her feel out of place. The receptionist looked up with a practiced smile. "How may I assist you?" Leah took a moment, her heart racing. "I need to speak with Mr. Victor Renzo." The receptionist's smile faltered, and for a split second, Leah saw something flicker in her eyes, something almost cautious. "I'm afraid Mr. Renzo is very busy today," the receptionist said, her tone no longer as friendly. "Do you have an appointment?" Leah shook her head, her mind working quickly. "No, but I need to see him. It's urgent." The receptionist hesitated, glancing at the phone on her desk. Leah could see the internal debate playing out in the woman's mind. After a tense moment, the receptionist picked up the phone and made a quick call. Leah's pulse quickened as she waited. Seconds felt like minutes. When the receptionist finally hung up, she gave Leah an apologetic smile. "Mr. Renzo is expecting you." Leah's stomach twisted with a mixture of anticipation and dread. A dangerous meeting. Victor was waiting for her in his office, lounging behind a massive mahogany desk that looked as if it had been carved from the heart of a century-old tree. His eyes were sharp, studying her as she walked in, his expression unreadable. "Miss Leah Aney," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Leah stood firm, refusing to let the coldness in his gaze unsettle her. "I need answers, Victor." His lips curled into a faint, almost predatory smile. "Answers? I must say, you're very bold to come here without an invitation." She didn't flinch. "I'm not here to play games." Victor leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers as he regarded her. "Then you're here because you've realized something is wrong, that your husband isn't who he seems to be." Leah's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" Victor chuckled softly, as if he had been expecting this. "You think T is your savior, don't you? You think he's your protector, the man who'll shield you from the world." Leah's jaw tightened, but she kept her composure. "T is more than that." Victor's smile widened. "Ah, but the truth is, T is just a man playing a very dangerous game. And you, my dear, are merely a pawn in his world of lies." Leah's mind reeled. She didn't want to believe it. She couldn't. But the way Victor said it made her question everything. "You think I'm just trying to manipulate you, don't you?" Victor's voice softened, a hint of something darker creeping into his tone. "The truth is, Leah, I've been trying to warn you. T is dangerous. He's using you as a shield, a distraction, while he builds his empire. And when he's done with you, you'll be nothing more than a broken piece in his puzzle." Leah felt the ground shift beneath her feet. His words had struck a nerve, but she couldn't let him see how much they affected her. "I don't believe you," she said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts. Victor's eyes glinted with something like amusement. "You will. You're smart, Leah. I know you'll figure it out." He stood up slowly, moving around the desk with the grace of a predator. "But until then, you'll continue to play your part in his world. And I'll be watching." Leah didn't know if he was threatening her or just being honest, but the message was clear. Victor wasn't going anywhere. As she turned to leave, she could feel his eyes on her, burning into her back. The tension in the room was palpable, and she knew that this was only the beginning. Leah left Renzo Enterprises with a sense of dread that hung heavily over her. Her meeting with Victor had been unsettling in ways she couldn't yet articulate. Every word, every glance from him felt like a calculated move, a warning, but also an invitation to a much darker game than she had imagined. Her mind was racing as she walked back through the city streets, her thoughts tangled in a web of fear and confusion. Was Victor really telling the truth about T? Was everything she had been told a lie? But as she approached the penthouse, she reminded herself that she wasn't there to play the victim. She couldn't let Victor's words dictate her next move. No, she had to find out for herself. She had to confront T. The confrontation. When she entered the penthouse, the weight of the moment hit her like a tidal wave. She had no idea how T would react to her being so bold, to stepping into the lion's den without his permission. T was standing by the window when she entered, his back to her as he looked out over the city. The moment the door clicked behind her, he turned around, his expression unreadable. "You're back earlier than expected," T said, his voice low, like he was carefully measuring his words. Leah didn't waste any time. She walked straight up to him, her gaze unwavering. "I spoke with Victor," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside her. T's face tightened, but his posture remained calm. "I figured you would. Why didn't you tell me the truth, T?" Leah asked, her voice edged with frustration. About Victor, about what's really going on? T's eyes darkened, and for a brief moment, Leah saw a flicker of something dangerous in them. You think Victor is a saint? He asked, his voice cold. He's not. He's just another man willing to do whatever it takes to win. And if that means playing mind games with you, then he'll do it. Leah shook her head, frustration building. I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about us. About what you're hiding from me. T was silent for a long moment, his gaze not leaving hers. Finally, he exhaled a sharp breath. I'm protecting you, he said, his voice strained. I told you this wasn't about love. But you need to understand something. Victor is not just my rival. He's obsessed. He'll do anything to ruin everything I've built. And if that means using you against me, then he will. Leah's chest tightened. So, what does that mean for me? What does it mean for us? T's expression softened, just for a moment, before it hardened again. It means you have to stay by my side. It means you have to keep up the act. Because if you don't, Victor wins. Leah swallowed hard. And what if I want out of this? T's eyes flashed with something almost imperceptible, a fleeting emotion that made her stomach twist. You can't just walk away, Leah. This isn't a game you can leave when it gets too hard. You're already too deep in it. Her heart pounded in her chest. What does that mean? T took a step closer to her, his presence overwhelming. It means that no matter what happens, you're mine now. And there's no escaping this world. Leah's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, they stood there, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. She could see the control in T's eyes, the ruthlessness that made him the man he was. But it wasn't just that. There was something else, a vulnerability, a hint of desperation hidden beneath the surface. She wasn't sure what to make of it. The game continues. Leah didn't know what was worse. The idea that she was trapped in this life, or the fact that she had no one to turn to for answers. Victor's threats were real, and T wasn't as invincible as he seemed. There were cracks in the empire he had built, cracks that Leah had only just begun to see. But despite everything, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to be anyone's pawn. Not anymore. The following days felt like a blur. Leah couldn't shake the weight of T's words, their implications gnawing at her, leaving her restless and anxious. His cold declaration that she was now part of this dangerous world, trapped in a game she couldn't leave, echoed in her mind, every step she took feeling more like a step further into a labyrinth with no way out. But Leah was not one to stay idle for long. If she was truly trapped, she needed to make her own moves. She had to find a way to gain control, to uncover the truth, and to decide for herself what her future would be. The first thing she did was dig deeper into T's past. He was hiding something, she was sure of it, and if she could uncover it, she could figure out how to use it to her advantage. It wasn't hard to find the records she was looking for. With all the resources at her disposal as T's wife, Leah had access to private information she'd never bothered to look at before. She had spent months learning the ins and outs of T's empire, his company, his businesses, but there was something else, something personal. She started with his family. T's father, she knew, was a shadowy figure, someone who had disappeared from public life long ago. But why? And what about T's mother, Mrs. Bai? The woman had always been a constant, lurking behind T like a puppet master. Leah dove into the family's financial records, the public documents, and interviews. What she found was startling. T's father hadn't just vanished. He'd been murdered. A mysterious death that had been brushed under the rug, a business dispute gone wrong, according to the official reports. But Leah wasn't buying it. T's father had been a ruthless businessman, involved in shady dealings with high-profile criminal organizations. But his death wasn't just an unfortunate accident. No, this was a message. And whoever had taken him out had made sure to leave no trace. Leah sat back, processing the information. The murder was a key event, one that had likely shaped T into the man he was today. But who had done it? And what did it mean for her? As Leah dug deeper, she began to see the pattern that had always eluded her. T had always been cautious about who he trusted. He kept his inner circle tight, and everyone around him seemed to hold a role in the grand scheme of his empire. The walls of the penthouse, the gleaming glass and steel of the office building. It wasn't just a fortress for the business. It was a prison, one T had built around himself to keep the world at bay. But even more unsettling was the realization that T's enemies weren't just corporate rivals. They were personal. And the murder of his father wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The more Leah uncovered, the more she began to understand the web that T was caught in. A web that stretched far beyond business. And she was tangled in it now, too. A visit from Mrs. Bai. Leah's investigation didn't go unnoticed for long. It was only a matter of time before Mrs. Bai showed up at the penthouse. The older woman, tall and elegant, walked in without a word, her heels clicking on the polished floor. Her sharp eyes quickly took in the room, her gaze lingering on Leah with an intensity that made Leah's skin prickle. "I hear you've been doing some digging," Mrs. Bai said, her voice calm but laced with authority. Leah didn't flinch. She had known this confrontation was coming. "I'm just trying to understand the truth, Mrs. Bai." The older woman's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The truth? My dear, you're playing a dangerous game. It's not wise to dig too deep into things that don't concern you." Leah stood her ground, meeting the other woman's gaze. "If it concerns T, then it concerns me." Mrs. Bai stepped closer, her presence imposing. "T doesn't need your help, Leah. He's already done enough to protect you. You have no idea what you're dealing with." Leah could feel the weight of Mrs. Bai's words, but she didn't back down. "Then tell me the truth. Tell me why his father was murdered. Tell me what really happened." For a moment, Mrs. Bai's eyes flickered, a brief hint of something. Fear, perhaps. Before she masked it with a cool indifference. T's father was a man with many enemies. He made his choices, and he paid for them. But T, her voice softened, a sharp contrast to the usual venom. T is different. He's not like his father. He's smarter. He knows how to control things, how to survive. Leah's mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. And what about me? Am I just another pawn in his game? Another piece to protect him? Mrs. Bai's gaze was unwavering. "No, you're more than that, Leah. You're his weakness." Leah felt her breath catch in her throat. She wasn't sure if she should be afraid, or if she should embrace the power that came with the knowledge. But one thing was certain. She wasn't going to sit back and let herself be controlled any longer. Leah couldn't shake the feeling that the world she had stepped into was far darker than she could have ever imagined. Mrs. Bai's cryptic words echoed in her mind, and for the first time, Leah realized just how deeply involved she had become in this dangerous game. She wasn't just a pawn. She was something far more valuable, something that T needed, whether she liked it or not. Her heart raced as she pondered Mrs. Bai's words. "You're his weakness." If she was his weakness, then that meant T had vulnerabilities, and vulnerabilities could be exploited. But she wasn't foolish enough to think she could outsmart him outright. T was a mastermind, cold, calculating, and always 5 steps ahead. T's vulnerability. Despite his carefully constructed walls, Leah had begun to see glimpses of T's weaknesses, fragments of the man he tried to keep hidden from the world. His cold demeanor, his obsessive control over everything around him, and his unwillingness to trust anyone completely. All of it pointed to a deeper pain that he was unwilling to face. The more Leah thought about it, the clearer it became that T's past was not just about power and business. It was about something much more personal. His father's death had shaped him, but something more had happened to T, something that had turned him into the ruthless man he was today. Leah needed to know what that was. That night, Leah sat across from T at their dinner table, the air between them thick with unspoken words. The city lights glittered in the distance, but the tension in the room was suffocating. T had been unusually quiet all evening, his usual charm and charisma replaced by a stoic silence. Leah wasn't sure if he was avoiding her, or if he was simply lost in his own thoughts, but she couldn't let him shut her out any longer. Breaking the silence, Leah spoke softly, her voice steady. "T, I need to understand what happened. I need to know about your father. About everything." T's eyes flickered briefly to hers before quickly looking away. His jaw clenched, and for a moment, Leah wondered if she had made a mistake in bringing it up. "I've told you before, Leah. There's nothing to talk about," he said, his voice cold. Lia didn't back down. But there is, T. You've been hiding it all this time. And now I need to know the truth. You can't keep running from it. T stood abruptly, pushing his chair back with a force that made the room seem to tremble. He turned his back on her, staring out the window. His posture was rigid, as though he were struggling with a storm inside him. I don't want to talk about it, he said, his voice strained. Lia stood, walking toward him. You think I'll just sit here and pretend everything is fine? That I'll be content playing the part of the perfect wife while you keep all of this from me? T's shoulders tensed, and for the first time, Lia saw him falter. His guard was slipping. You don't understand, he muttered, almost to himself. Lia's heart pounded. Then make me understand, T. Make me see what you're running from. For a long, agonizing moment, T didn't speak. He didn't turn around, but Lia could see the storm raging inside him. Finally, his voice broke through the silence. I didn't just lose my father, Lia, T said, his tone raw and vulnerable in a way she had never heard before. I lost everything. My family. My identity. Everything I thought I knew about myself was shattered. Lia stepped closer, her heart aching for the man who had built his walls so high. T, what happened? T's hands curled into fists, his knuckles turning white. My father's death wasn't an accident. It was a message. Someone wanted him gone, and they made sure to make it as painful as possible. They didn't just take his life. They destroyed everything he stood for. And they almost took me with him. Lia's breath caught in her throat. Who did this? Who killed him? T's voice trembled with barely contained rage. It doesn't matter now. What matters is that I survived. But surviving doesn't mean you're living, Lia. I've been running from that day ever since. Lia could see the weight of those words in his eyes, the burden he had been carrying alone, the secret that had haunted him for so long. She reached out, her hand brushing his arm gently. You don't have to do this alone anymore, she said softly. T's gaze softened, and for a fleeting moment, Lia saw a side of him she had never seen before. A man who wasn't just a CEO or a mastermind, but someone who had been broken, someone who needed help to heal. But as quickly as the moment passed, the walls went back up. T pulled away, his expression hardening once more. I'm not asking for your pity, Lia, he said, his voice steely. I don't need anyone's help, and I don't need you to feel sorry for me. Lia nodded, her throat tight. I'm not pitying you, T. I just want to help you. He turned away from her, his back to her once again. I don't need help. I need control. The conversation left Lia unsettled. She had caught a glimpse of T's raw vulnerability, and though he had quickly shut it down, she knew there was more to him than the cold, ruthless CEO he portrayed. The man behind the empire had been scarred in ways Lia could never fully understand, and it was clear that those scars ran deep. But it also left her with a decision to make. Could she keep playing the role of his wife, the perfect partner in his dangerous game? Or would she take the power back, uncover the rest of the secrets he was hiding, and forge her own path? One thing was certain. T wasn't the only one with secrets, and Lia was beginning to realize that her own hidden truths might hold the key to her freedom. Lia's mind buzzed with possibilities as she sat in the stillness of the penthouse, the silence heavy around her. She had come to T with an open heart, hoping for answers, but all she had found were more questions. His walls had cracked for a moment, but they quickly rebuilt themselves, stronger than ever. But now, she knew what she had to do. The power had shifted in their relationship, and it wasn't just in T's hands anymore. She had the upper hand, even if he didn't know it yet. Lia had uncovered pieces of his past, and she was no longer the naive woman who had fallen into his world without knowing its dangers. She had learned to play the game, and now it was time for her to make her move. Lia wasn't going to confront T directly, not yet. She needed leverage, something that would make him finally open up, something that would make him trust her in ways he hadn't before. She had to learn more about his enemies, the ones who had killed his father, the ones who were still lurking in the shadows. The first step was simple. She had to get closer to Victor. Victor had been more than willing to engage with her in their last meeting, and though she didn't trust him fully, he might just be the key to understanding the depths of T's world. If Victor had the information she needed, she would use it. But Lia was smart enough to know that she had to play her cards carefully. Victor was just as dangerous as T, if not more so. He had his own agenda, and she wasn't about to let him pull her into a trap. The evening air was crisp as Lia stepped out of the elevator and into the sleek, modern lobby of Victor's office. She had arranged the meeting under the guise of wanting to get his side of the story. Victor greeted her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, his charming demeanor hiding something darker beneath the surface. "Lia," he said, extending his hand. "I'm glad you decided to come. I've been waiting for you." Lia shook his hand, keeping her face neutral. "I thought it was time we had a real conversation." Victor led her to his office, a luxurious space that mirrored his cold, calculated nature. Everything was pristine, everything in its place, just like him. "I'm sure you have questions," Victor said, leaning back in his chair. "But before you ask, let me tell you something. I'm not here to play games. You already know how high the stakes are." Lia's pulse quickened, but she kept her composure. "I know that T's life isn't what it seems. You don't need to convince me of that. What I need to know is who is behind all of this. Who killed his father? And why?" Victor's eyes flickered for just a moment, his mask slipping. But it was enough. Lia knew she was getting close. "That's a question T would rather not answer," Victor said slowly, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "But it's not just about the past, Lia. It's about the future. T is a man who controls everything, except the things he can't control. And those are the things that will bring him down." Lia leaned forward, her voice low. "What do you mean? What's coming for him?" Victor's gaze turned cold. T's father didn't just have enemies in business. He crossed the wrong people. And now, T is doing the same. The difference is, T doesn't even realize how close he's come to the edge. He's playing a dangerous game, and eventually, it will catch up to him. Lia's heart raced. "Are you saying that T's enemies are still after him? That they're going to finish what they started with his father?" Victor didn't respond immediately. He studied her carefully, as if weighing her every word. "T's world is built on lies, Lia. And the biggest lie of all is that he's untouchable. But he's not. And if you're smart, you'll get out before it's too late." Lia's thoughts were swirling, but she didn't let her emotions show. "Why are you telling me all this?" Victor smiled, but it was cold and calculating. "Because I'm not your enemy, Lia. T is. He's the one who's keeping you trapped in this world. But you don't have to stay here. You have a choice." As Lia left Victor's office, her mind was spinning. She had the information she needed. Victor's words had confirmed what she had feared. T's empire was on the brink of collapse, and she was caught in the middle of it. But there was more to the story than Victor was telling her. She wasn't about to trust him fully, not when he had his own agenda. But what about T? What was he going to do when he realized that the past he had tried so hard to bury was coming back for him? Lia knew she had to make a decision. Should she stay by his side, play her role as his wife, and try to help him navigate the dangers he was facing? Or should she walk away from it all, take the power she now held in her hands, and leave the chaos behind? The choice wasn't an easy one. When Lia returned to the penthouse, T was waiting for her. His expression was unreadable, but there was an intensity in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. "You spoke with Victor," T said, his voice cold. Lia didn't flinch. "I did. He had a lot to say." T's eyes narrowed, and his jaw clenched. "I told you not to get involved with him. He's playing you, Lia." Lia crossed the room and stood before him, her gaze steady. "No, T. You're the one who's been playing me. I know the truth now. I know about your father's death, about your enemies, about everything." T didn't react immediately. He simply stared at her, as if trying to gauge her next move. "I'm not going to stay in the dark anymore," Lia continued. "I'm done being your pawn." For a moment, the tension between them was palpable, the air thick with unspoken words. T's eyes flickered with something. Anger, regret, or maybe even something deeper. But then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. "You're not just walking away from this, Lia," T said, his voice low, dangerous. "You're in this now, and there's no going back." Lia stood at the edge of a precipice, and T's words echoed in her mind like a warning. "You're in this now, and there's no going back." For the first time since she had walked into this twisted world, She truly understood the gravity of what she was involved in. T's empire wasn't just a kingdom of wealth and power. It was a labyrinth of secrets, lies, and enemies waiting to pounce. The danger was real. And now, with her knowledge of the past and the growing threat around them, Leah knew she couldn't afford to hesitate. But was she ready to make the final gamble? T's words and the weight of truth. Leah didn't flinch when T spoke again, his voice colder than the night air that crept into the penthouse. Victor isn't your friend, Leah. I told you that for a reason. He'll use whatever he can to get to me, and if he's gotten to you. I'm not your enemy, T, Leah interrupted, her voice firm. I'm not here to tear you down, but I won't keep living in the dark, playing this game without knowing the rules. T's gaze softened for just a fraction of a second, but it was gone before Leah could make sense of it. Instead, he looked away, his jaw tightening again. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I have a pretty good idea now, Leah responded quietly, but there was strength in her voice. I've seen the cracks, T. I've felt them, and I've seen the danger coming for you. For both of us. If I'm going to stay here, if I'm going to help you, I need to know everything. I need to understand your past. Your father's death wasn't an accident, and there's more to this empire than just business. T's eyes flashed with something unreadable. For a moment, Leah thought he might shut down completely, but then, just when she thought he would turn away, he spoke. You think you want to understand, but the truth is, he paused, his gaze locking onto hers. The truth will change everything. It will destroy you. It will destroy us. Leah's pulse quickened, but she didn't look away. I've already been destroyed, T. I've already seen too much to go back now. The air between them crackled with tension. T took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping ever so slightly as if the weight of the past was pressing down on him more than usual. You're right, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. It's not just about my father. It's about everything that came after. It's about power, who controls it, who craves it, and who is willing to do anything to get it. Leah's heart raced as she took a step closer. I'm listening. T's voice dropped even lower, as if he were revealing something he had kept hidden from the world. After my father died, I inherited more than just his company. I inherited his enemies, his debts, and the things he was involved in. Things I never fully understood until it was too late. There are forces at play, forces that would rather see me dead than in control. And Victor, he hesitated, the name hanging in the air like a curse. Victor is one of those forces. He's not on my side, Leah. Not anymore. Leah's mind raced. Victor had been playing her from the start. T turned away from her, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I've been trying to protect you, trying to keep you out of this mess. But now you're involved whether you like it or not. And the truth is, he trailed off, his voice hoarse. I can't protect you from what's coming. Not anymore. Leah's heart clenched, but she refused to let fear control her. She had been in the dark for too long, and now that she knew the truth, there was no going back. I'm not scared, T, Leah said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. I'm ready to face whatever comes next. T looked back at her, his gaze intense. You think you are. But this world is nothing like you think. There are people out there who will stop at nothing to destroy me, us. And if you keep playing this game, you'll be just as much a target as I am. Leah took a deep breath, then closed the distance between them. I'm already a target, T. I've been a pawn in this game long enough, but no more. You're right about one thing. I can't keep running from the truth. I'm going to help you, but I need you to trust me. I can't do this alone. For a long moment, T didn't respond. His eyes searched hers, as if he was trying to read her, trying to gauge whether she was truly ready for what lay ahead. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and solemn. I never wanted this for you. But now that you're in this, there's no going back. We'll have to fight together. And it won't be easy. It'll cost us everything. Leah didn't hesitate. I'm ready. I've made my choice. The call to action. T's phone rang abruptly, shattering the tension in the room. He glanced at the screen before answering. What is it? He barked into the phone. Leah could hear the sharp tone in his voice, and though she couldn't make out the words on the other end, it was clear that the conversation was serious. After a brief pause, T's face tightened, his eyes darkening. I'll be there. No more delays. He hung up abruptly and turned to Leah, his face grim. That was my contact, he said, his voice tense. The enemy's making a move. It's time we take control. Leah's heart raced as she stepped toward him. What do we need to do? T's expression softened for a brief moment, just enough for Leah to see a glimpse of the man he could be, the man who had once trusted and loved someone enough to let them in. We need to take back what's ours. And we need to do it fast. Victor isn't going to wait for us to make a move. He's already plotting his next step. Leah felt the weight of the moment settle around her, but she didn't look away. The game had changed, and now, there was no turning back. Let's do it, she said. T's voice lingered in the air as he spoke the words that marked the beginning of their final gambit. Victor isn't going to wait for us to make a move. He's already plotting his next step. Leah couldn't help but feel the weight of everything pressing down on her. The danger was real, and the stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about survival. It was about T's empire, about the lies that had been buried for years, and about everything that would be lost if they didn't act quickly. But even more than that, it was about the relationship that had grown between them. Leah had walked into T's world with eyes wide open, but now, she was in too deep to walk away. T paced back and forth, his thoughts racing as he tried to map out the best way to confront Victor. Leah could see the tension in his body. His every movement was charged with an energy that told her just how high the stakes were. We need to strike first, T said, his voice low, calculating. Victor's been making his moves under the radar, but I know where he's vulnerable. We'll hit him where it hurts. Leah nodded, feeling a chill run through her at the thought of what they were about to do. What's the plan? T stopped pacing and turned to face her, his eyes intense. We need to get information. Victor's been playing the game for too long, and we need to expose him. His connections, his money, his alliances, all of it. We can't let him control the narrative anymore. And we can't let him think he's one step ahead. Leah was already thinking ahead. She had learned quickly in this world that knowledge was power, and she had a few cards up her sleeve. What about his financials? The transactions he's been hiding under the table? We could use that. T raised an eyebrow. You've been doing your homework. I'm not in this to lose, T, Leah said, her tone firm. If we're going after Victor, we need to hit him hard, and we need to make sure he can't escape. We'll start with his accounts. I know a way to get access to them. T's lips curled into a small, approving smile. I knew I kept you around for a reason. The tension that had lingered between them seemed to ease for a moment. But Leah knew this was far from over. If anything, the real game was just beginning. The night of their first move arrived. Leah and T sat together in the back of a sleek, black car as it drove toward a location T had kept secret. The rain pelted the windows, adding to the tension in the air. As they arrived at the destination, T turned to her, his gaze serious. This is it. We make our move now, and we do it together. Leah nodded, but deep down, she could feel a gnawing uncertainty. She didn't trust Victor, but the thought of going up against him made her heart race with fear. Victor wasn't just a businessman. He was ruthless, calculating, and he had a network of people willing to do whatever it took to protect him. T and Leah made their way into a nondescript building, a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, hidden from prying eyes. Inside, a group of T's trusted allies waited. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, but something about the situation didn't sit right with Leah. T turned to her before they entered the building. Stay close. This is going to get messy. As they walked into the heart of the operation, Leah could see the tension in the air. There were too many people in the room who didn't look like they were on T's side. She had been around the business world long enough to spot a rat when she saw one, and as the meeting began, her suspicion grew. T was giving orders, but there was something about the way the others were reacting. They didn't seem as loyal as she had expected. She noticed one man in particular, a member of T's inner circle, who was watching everything with cold eyes. Leah's instincts flared. She felt like she was walking into a trap. Everything happened in a blur. One moment, they were discussing strategy. The next, Leah saw the man she had been watching pull out a gun. Time seemed to slow as the sound of the gunshot rang out, echoing in the cold, sterile warehouse. T's body jerked, his face registering shock before his knees buckled. The world spun around Leah as she rushed toward him, her heart pounding in her chest. "No!" she screamed, but the words felt like they came from a distant place. She knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she tried to stop the bleeding. T's face was pale, his eyes dazed as he looked up at her. "Leah, get out of here. It's a setup." Leah's mind was a whirlwind. She couldn't believe it. Betrayed by one of his own people? By someone he had trusted? "I'm not leaving you, T," Leah said, her voice fierce. She ripped her jacket off and pressed it to his wound, but she could already tell it was too late. His breathing was shallow, his eyes beginning to lose focus. T's lips curved into a faint smile, but it was more tragic than anything. You're a part of this now, Leah. You've crossed the line." Leah's heart sank. She wasn't sure what he meant, if he was talking about their relationship or the game they had been pulled into, but in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was that T needed her, and she wasn't going to let him go. But as she looked around the room, the faces of T's allies now seemed less trustworthy than before. And then, the man who had shot him stepped forward, his gun still aimed at T. Leah's body tensed as she realized the depth of the betrayal. She wasn't just up against Victor. There was a mole in their ranks, someone who had played both sides all along. The gunshot had changed everything. Leah's heart thundered in her chest, and her hands were slick with T's blood. Time seemed to stretch in impossible ways, every second feeling like a lifetime. She couldn't believe what had just happened. The betrayal was like a weight, suffocating the air around them. The man who had shot T was standing a few feet away, his gun still pointed at the bleeding body of the man she'd come to trust, and perhaps even care for. T's breathing was labored, and Leah could feel his strength waning with every passing moment. She wasn't sure how much time they had, but she knew it wasn't long. "Leah," T's voice was a hoarse whisper, strained with pain. "Get out of here. You can't save me." His words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had to save him. She had to. But there was no time to waste. She looked around, scanning the room. The faces of the men surrounding them were blurred, but one thing was clear. They weren't here to help. They had been waiting for this moment, and now that it had arrived, they were circling like vultures, ready to finish what had been started. Leah's gaze landed on the man who had shot T, the traitor in their midst. His eyes were cold, calculating. The gun still in his hand was pointed unwaveringly toward T's chest. "Get away from him," Leah growled, her voice rough with emotion. Her hand instinctively went to her own weapon, hidden in the small of her back, and she drew it with a swift motion. The man smirked, clearly not intimidated. "You think you can stop this? You're too late, girl." Leah didn't hesitate. She raised the gun, aiming directly at him. Her hand didn't shake, but her heart pounded in her chest. She had to act fast. She had to take control. But just as she was about to pull the trigger, a voice cut through the tension like a knife. "You think you can make the rules now?" Leah turned, her heart dropping into her stomach. The voice belonged to one of T's most trusted allies, a man named Roland. He stepped forward from the shadows, his expression unreadable. "I didn't think it would end like this," Roland continued, his voice low. "But this was bound to happen eventually. You should have stayed out of it, Leah." Leah's eyes narrowed. You were in on this?" Roland's smile was cold, almost mocking. "Did you really think he could keep you safe forever? You've made a powerful enemy, and now you're caught in the middle of a war you don't even understand." T let out a strangled cough, his body shuddering as the blood continued to flow. Leah's heart twisted with panic, but she couldn't afford to be distracted. She had to deal with Roland first. "Get away from him," Leah said again, her voice steady, despite the fury rising inside her. Roland took a step forward, but the movement was slow, deliberate. "You think I'm afraid of you, Leah? Don't make me laugh." Leah's mind raced, every thought running a mile a minute. She knew she couldn't just shoot Roland. Not here. Not like this. There was too much at stake, and if she killed him, it would only bring more chaos. But she had to stop him from making his next move. Her eyes flicked to T. He was barely conscious, his hand gripping hers weakly. He needed her. She couldn't let him die. Don't worry, Roland sneered. I'm not here to kill you. Not yet. Then why are you here? Lia demanded, her voice rising. Because it's over, Lia. It's always been over. Roland's words hung in the air like a death sentence. Victor won. You were just a pawn. T was never going to win this fight. T's breath hitched, and for the first time, Lia saw the pain in his eyes. The look of someone who realized that everything he had worked for, the empire, the power, the trust, was crumbling before him. No, T whispered, his voice barely audible. I didn't lose. Lia's heart broke for him, but there was no time to mourn. She had to act. As Roland took another step forward, Lia's instincts kicked in. She couldn't afford to hesitate anymore. With a swift motion, she turned her gun toward him, her eyes narrowing with a mixture of fear and determination. Roland froze, his eyes widening for just a second before he lifted his hands in mock surrender. You're making a mistake, Lia. You don't know what you're doing. Lia's voice was icy. I'm doing what needs to be done. Before Roland could react, she fired a shot. Just a warning shot, but it was enough to get him to back off. His eyes flicked to the other men in the room, but none of them moved. You don't want to do this, Roland warned. You'll regret it. But Lia didn't falter. She didn't have the luxury of regret anymore. You're not going to win, she said, her voice unwavering. T might be down, but I'm not. You'll never control this empire, Roland. Not after what you've done. Roland's expression twisted in frustration. You think this is about control? You think Victor cares about control? Then what is this about? Lia demanded, her gun still aimed at him. Roland's smile returned, but it was full of malice. It's about the future, Lia. The future of this empire. And you're a small part of a much larger picture. Before Lia could react, Roland turned on his heel and walked toward the exit. But don't worry. You'll learn soon enough. And when you do, it'll be too late. Lia's grip tightened on her gun, but she didn't move. She watched as Roland disappeared into the shadows, leaving her alone with T, her only ally in this deadly game. Lia rushed to T's side, her hands shaking as she pressed down harder on the wound. She couldn't lose him. Not now. T, stay with me, she whispered urgently. T's eyes fluttered open, his face pale and strained. You saved me. His voice was barely audible, but there was a glimmer of something in his eyes. Gratitude, maybe, or just the relief of not being alone in this. You're not getting rid of me that easily, Lia said, her voice soft but firm. The room was silent except for the sound of T's ragged breathing. Lia knew they were in the thick of it now. The war had only just begun, and Victor, Roland, everyone who had betrayed them was going to be waiting for their next move. But for the first time since she entered T's world, Lia felt a surge of power within herself. She wasn't just a pawn anymore. She was a player. And she was going to make sure T didn't lose everything. That was her promise. The silence in the room was thick, oppressive. Lia didn't dare take her eyes off T for even a second. Her fingers pressed desperately against his wound. His blood was soaking her hands, staining the fabric of her clothes, but she didn't care. The world outside seemed to fade into the background as she focused solely on T's labored breathing. She needed to stop the bleeding, keep him conscious, do anything to keep him alive. T's face was pale, his lips barely forming words as he spoke. Lia, his voice was a whisper, raspy and weak. You have to trust me. She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. Don't talk like that. We're going to get you help. No, T's grip tightened on her hand, weak but insistent. You have to listen. It's not just Victor, not just Roland. There's someone else, someone inside. Lia felt her heart skip a beat. What do you mean? But T's eyes fluttered shut before he could answer. Her pulse quickened. She couldn't lose him, not after everything they'd been through. She needed him to survive. Needed him to answer the questions that were piling up faster than she could process them. Who could she trust? Who was behind this? Lia pulled her phone from her pocket, her hands shaking as she dialed the number for the private doctor who had helped T in the past. She had no idea how much time they had left, but she had to act quickly. The line clicked, and a voice answered. "Dr. Keller," the doctor said, his tone calm but professional. Leah barely took a second to catch her breath before speaking. "It's T. He's been shot. I need you to come right now." There was no hesitation on the other end. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, the doctor replied. "Make sure he stays awake. Don't let him fall unconscious." Leah disconnected the call and looked down at T. His face was still pale, but he was clinging to life. She pressed her hand harder against the wound, her own breath coming in shallow gasps. Suddenly, a noise at the door made her freeze. Someone was coming. Leah's body tensed. She grabbed her gun, holding it at the ready, but her mind was racing. Was it one of T's men? Or was it someone who had come to finish what Roland had started? The door creaked open slowly. Leah's finger hovered on the trigger, ready for anything. But when the door swung fully open, her breath caught in her throat. Standing in the doorway was someone she hadn't expected. It was Luciana, T's ex-fiancée. Her presence in the doorway was like a punch to the gut. Luciana had been part of T's past, someone who had once been by his side until their relationship had fallen apart under the pressure of his empire. She had disappeared from his life years ago, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and unresolved emotions. Leah could feel her pulse racing, confusion and disbelief filling her mind. Why was Luciana here now, and why hadn't T mentioned her? Luciana's gaze locked onto T's unconscious form, her eyes filled with a mixture of shock and something darker. She stepped into the room slowly, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "Is he?" Luciana's voice trembled, but she quickly composed herself, walking toward T with a determined stride. Leah stepped forward, keeping her gun trained on Luciana. "Stay back. What are you doing here?" Luciana raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing at the corner of her lips. "You think I'm here to finish what Roland started? Please, Leah. I'm not here for that." Leah's instincts were screaming at her. There was something about Luciana's presence that didn't sit right, like a wolf in sheep's clothing. "Then why are you here?" she demanded, her voice tight. Luciana sighed, shaking her head slowly. "I didn't want it to come to this. But you don't understand what's really going on, do you? You think this is about Victor and Roland?" Leah narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean?" Luciana's expression hardened, the mask of indifference slipping away. "It's bigger than that. It always has been." She stepped closer, but Leah didn't lower her gun. "T's been a pawn, just like you. And now that you're in this, it's too late to back out." Leah's mind was spinning. She wasn't sure what Luciana was playing at, but the look in her eyes told Leah that nothing was as it seemed. "I'm not backing out," Leah said through clenched teeth. "Tell me what you know, and I might consider trusting you." Luciana's gaze flicked to T. "You think he's the only one who has enemies? You think he's the only one who's been betrayed? There's someone else pulling the strings. Someone you never even considered." Leah's blood ran cold. "Who?" Luciana took a deep breath, her voice barely a whisper. "Your mother." Leah's breath caught in her throat. "What did you say?" Luciana's smile was tight, a thin line of triumph that sent a shiver down Leah's spine. "I said your mother. She's the one behind it all. The one who's been orchestrating everything from the shadows. Roland, Victor, all of them. They're just pawns in her game." The words echoed in Leah's mind, and she felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath her. Her mother? She had always known that her family had secrets, dark ones. But this was something she hadn't anticipated. No, you're lying." Leah's voice was shaking now, her hands trembling as she fought to hold herself together. Luciana shook her head slowly. "I wish I were. But the truth is, your mother has been controlling everything from behind the scenes. She's the one who arranged for Roland to take his shot at T. She's the one who's been setting this whole thing up." Leah couldn't process it. Her mother, the woman who had always supported her, the one who had been there through thick and thin. She was behind this? "I don't believe you," Leah said, her voice cold and distant. "Why should I believe you?" Luciana's expression softened, but there was a sadness there now. "Because you have no other choice. Your mother's a mastermind, Leah. And if you want to save T, If you want to save yourself, you need to know the truth. For the first time since she'd entered this world, Leah felt truly lost. The game had shifted in ways she couldn't understand, and the lines between friend and foe were blurring. Leah's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. The words Luciana had just spoken, "Your mother is behind this," echoed over and over again in her head like a cruel, mocking chant. She had known that her family had secrets, but she had never imagined they could go this deep. Could it really be true? Could her mother, her very own mother, be the one pulling all the strings behind the chaos that had erupted in her life? Leah's fingers trembled as she looked from Luciana to T, who was still unconscious on the floor. She had to think fast. If Luciana was telling the truth, and her mother was somehow involved, it changed everything. Everything she thought she knew about loyalty, family, and trust was suddenly in question. Luciana's gaze softened as she watched Leah struggle to make sense of the bombshell she had just dropped. "I know this is hard to believe, Leah, but you've seen the signs, haven't you? Your mother's been pulling you into this world without you even knowing. You thought you were just a pawn in T's game, but the truth is, you're much more important than you realize. You've always been more important." Leah's heart pounded in her chest. Why would she do this? What does she want from me? From T? Luciana's lips curled into a faint smile, but it was the kind of smile one might give when delivering an unpleasant truth. "It's not just about T. It's about the Empire. Your mother has always been hungry for power. She's been in the shadows, manipulating everything, pulling every string. She wants control, and she'll do whatever it takes to get it." Luciana's tone was measured, almost cold. "You were never supposed to be in the picture, Leah, but T's been protecting you, and now you're tangled up in this mess." Leah's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "No, this can't be true." She shook her head, trying to convince herself it wasn't. "I refuse to believe it." Luciana stepped closer, her heels clicking sharply on the floor as she crouched beside Leah. "I know you want to believe the best in her, Leah, but you have to understand, you're at the center of something much bigger than you realize. Your mother has always been playing a game with high stakes, and now it's your turn to choose which side you're on." Leah took a deep breath, her mind racing. Was this some kind of twisted manipulation? Was Luciana just trying to drive a wedge between her and her family? Or was this the painful truth she had to face? "I don't know what to believe anymore," Leah murmured, her voice filled with frustration. She glanced at T once again. He needed her, and she couldn't afford to get lost in uncertainty. "I can't afford to be distracted. T's life is on the line." Luciana nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the situation. "That's why I'm here, Leah. I'm offering you an alliance. If you want to save T and yourself, you need to trust me. You can't take on your mother alone. She's too powerful." Leah's heart raced at the thought of trusting Luciana, someone who had once been part of T's past, someone who had walked away from him. "And why should I trust you? You left T. You betrayed him once. What makes you think I'll believe anything you say?" Luciana's face darkened, her eyes flickering with emotion. "I didn't want to leave him, Leah, but I had no choice. The Empire wasn't what I thought it was. I was just another pawn in your mother's game. You think T is the only one who's been manipulated? I've seen how your mother operates. I know what she's capable of. And I know she's not going to stop until she has everything." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "That includes you." Leah felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Luciana's words were sinking in, and a part of her knew she had to take them seriously. She had already lost so much. Could she afford to lose more? "And what do you want from me in return?" Leah asked, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "Why should I trust you when you've betrayed everyone else?" Luciana's gaze hardened, and for a brief moment, Leah saw the fierce woman she had once been. "I want to help you. I want to stop your mother from destroying everything, including T. I don't want to be part of this game anymore. But I can't do it alone. You need to make a choice, Leah. Are you going to keep playing your mother's game? Or are you going to take control of your own destiny?" Leah's mind whirred with 1,000 thoughts. The idea of teaming up with Luciana felt wrong, like she was walking into a trap. But at the same time, it was the only option she had left if she wanted to protect T and find out the truth about her mother's role in everything. I don't trust you, Leah said, her voice low. But I don't have much of a choice, do I? Luciana's lips curled into a smile. No, you don't. She stood up, her gaze never leaving Leah's. We need to move fast. Your mother has eyes everywhere. If we don't act now, we'll be too late. Leah nodded, her resolve hardening. What's the plan? Luciana glanced at T, then back at Leah. First, we need to get him to safety. Your mother's not going to let this go. She'll be coming after him, and she'll do anything to finish the job. And you're sure you can help us? Leah's voice was sharp, distrust still coloring her words. Luciana's eyes hardened. I'm sure. I'm not asking you to trust me completely, Leah, but I'm offering you a chance to fight back. I've seen how your mother operates. She's ruthless. If we don't get ahead of her, we'll lose. Leah's mind raced. She had so many questions, but now was not the time. She needed to focus on T and getting him the help he so desperately needed. She could worry about the rest later. Okay, Leah said, her voice firm. Let's get him out of here. Just as Luciana turned to leave, a sharp sound pierced the air. Gunshots. The walls of the penthouse trembled with the impact, and Leah felt a chill creep up her spine. Get down, Luciana shouted, pulling Leah to the floor just as another volley of shots rang out. Leah's pulse raced as she scrambled for cover, her hand still clutching her gun. Her mind was already processing, calculating the next steps. This wasn't just about T anymore. This was about survival. And someone had just made their move. The door to the penthouse burst open, and figures dressed in black stormed in, their faces obscured by masks. Leah's eyes widened. More enemies? The game was escalating faster than she had anticipated. T, Leah shouted, her voice filled with desperation. We need to move. But the gunmen were closing in, and the moment of escape was slipping through her fingers. The room exploded into chaos. The masked gunmen moved with precision, their weapons raised, their black uniforms blending into the shadows of the penthouse. Leah barely had time to register their presence before bullets sprayed across the walls, shattering glass and sending shards flying through the air. She ducked, instinct taking over as she grabbed T by the arm and dragged him behind the overturned couch. His body was limp, his breathing shallow, but he was still alive. That was all that mattered. Luciana had already drawn her gun, her sharp eyes scanning the attackers as she fired a warning shot. They're professionals, she hissed under her breath. Whoever sent them doesn't want T to leave this place alive. Leah's mind raced. Was this her mother's doing? Had she already made her move? There was no time to think. They had to fight their way out. Leah turned to Luciana. Cover me. I need to get T to safety. Luciana nodded without hesitation, pivoting to fire at the advancing gunmen. One of them grunted as a bullet struck his shoulder, sending him stumbling back. But there were too many of them. If they didn't move fast, they'd be trapped. Leah reached into T's jacket, her fingers closing around his spare gun. She had barely fired a weapon before all of this, but desperation had a way of sharpening instincts. She took a deep breath, then peeked over the couch, aiming for the nearest attacker. She fired. The gun recoiled violently in her grip, but she didn't stop. One of the masked men went down, clutching his leg. The others hesitated for a split second, and that was all Leah needed. She grabbed T under his arms, dragging him toward the back hallway. There's a service elevator, she called to Luciana. We can take it down to the basement garage. Luciana fired one last shot before turning to follow Leah. Let's move. The gunmen recovered quickly, their boots pounding against the marble floors as they charged after them. Bullets whizzed past Leah's head, but she didn't stop. She had one goal: get T out alive. They reached the hallway, the door to the service elevator just a few feet away. Leah's heart pounded as she hit the call button, praying it would open in time. Ding! The doors slid open just as another round of bullets struck the walls behind them. Get in! Luciana shouted, shoving Leah and T inside before spinning around to fire one last shot. She dove in after them just as the doors closed. Leah gasped for air, her heart racing. They were safe, for now, but the fight was far from over. As the elevator descended, the only sound was the heavy breathing of the two women and the faint hum of the machinery. T was still unconscious, his face pale, his body weak. Lia pressed her hands against his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "Stay with me, T," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Luciana leaned against the wall, reloading her gun. "We don't have much time," she said. "Whoever sent those men will be waiting for us downstairs." Lia looked up, her eyes filled with suspicion. "You knew they were coming, didn't you?" Luciana didn't answer immediately. She exhaled, her gaze distant. "I had a feeling. Your mother moves fast. Once she knew T was alive, she wouldn't take any chances." Lia clenched her jaw. "I need to talk to her. I need to hear it from her own mouth." Luciana scoffed. "You think she'll tell you the truth? Lia, your mother is one of the most dangerous women in this city. She won't hesitate to lie to your face. She's been doing it your whole life." Lia's stomach twisted. A part of her still wanted to believe there was an explanation, some reason why her mother would do this. But the more she uncovered, the harder it was to deny the truth. She looked down at T, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "We need to get him somewhere safe first." Luciana nodded. "I know a place. But once we're there, we need to start planning our next move. Because believe me, Lia, this war is just beginning." As the elevator neared the basement, Lia felt her nerves tighten. Something wasn't right. Luciana must have felt it too. She reached for her gun, holding it ready. "Be careful," she muttered. The elevator doors slid open. Darkness. The garage was almost empty, lit only by the flickering overhead lights. The sound of a dripping pipe echoed through the vast, empty space. Lia took a cautious step forward, dragging T with her. Then she saw them. A line of black cars. And standing in front of them, her mother. Her heart stopped. Luciana cursed under her breath. "I told you," she whispered. Lia's mother stood with perfect poise, her expression unreadable. Behind her, armed men waited silently, their guns at their sides, but ready to be drawn at a moment's notice. "Lia." Her mother's voice was calm, as if they were discussing business over lunch. "I was hoping you'd come to me sooner." Lia's grip on T tightened. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, a mixture of anger, betrayal, and fear. "Why?" she demanded. "Why are you doing this?" Her mother sighed, tilting her head slightly. "Because I need you to understand something, my dear. Love makes men weak, and weakness has no place in this world." Lia's blood ran cold. T moaned softly, barely conscious, his body twitching in pain. Lia felt a surge of protectiveness she had never felt before. Her mother took a slow step forward. "I can still fix this, Lia. You don't have to fight me. You can still be on the winning side." Luciana shifted beside her, ready for anything. "Don't listen to her, Lia. She'll never let you walk away." Lia's heart pounded as she realized she was standing at a crossroads. The mother who had raised her, the man she had come to care for, and the woman who claimed to be her ally. Everything was coming to a head, and one wrong move could cost them everything. The garage was silent, yet the air was thick with tension. Lia stood frozen, her mother's words ringing in her ears. You can still be on the winning side. She had always known her mother was a powerful woman, ruthless, calculating, but never in her life had she imagined this moment. Her mother standing before her with an army of armed men, treating her like an opponent instead of a daughter. T moaned weakly in her arms, and that sound was enough to ground her. Her mother wanted her to believe there was only one choice, power or weakness. But Lia was beginning to realize that power didn't always come from control. Sometimes, real strength came from standing against the very thing that had shaped you. She glanced at Luciana, who was tense and ready, her hand hovering over her weapon. Luciana had already made her choice. She had turned her back on this world long ago. Now, it was Lia's turn. Mrs. Bai's expression remained calm, unreadable. She had always been a woman of patience, a strategist who never moved without calculating every outcome. And right now, she was watching Lia like a chess piece she was waiting to place in the right position. "Lia," her mother said, taking a slow step forward. The sound of her heels against the concrete echoed ominously. "You're confused. I understand. But everything I've done has been for you." Lia clenched her jaw. "You sent people to kill T. Mrs. Bai sighed, as if she were correcting a child. T is a problem, a distraction, a liability. Her gaze flickered to Luciana, then back to her daughter. And you? You have the potential to be something great, greater than even me. But only if you stop letting your emotions control you. Leah's grip on T tightened. So I'm just supposed to turn my back on him? On everything? Just like you did? Her mother's lips twitched into something resembling a smile. I didn't turn my back on anyone, Leah. I made choices. Hard ones. And look where it got me. She gestured around the garage, to the black cars, to the men waiting for her command. Power. Security. Control. Everything you could ever need. Leah felt a sharp pang in her chest. For years, she had admired her mother's strength. The way she commanded a room. The way she never showed weakness. But now, she saw the truth. Her mother wasn't strong because she was ruthless. She was strong because she had never let anyone close enough to hurt her. And Leah refused to become that. I won't be like you, Leah whispered, shaking her head. I won't sacrifice the people I love just to feel powerful. A flicker of something. Disappointment? Amusement? Crossed Mrs. Bai's face. Love makes people weak, Leah. No, Leah said firmly, stepping back. It makes them strong. Her mother exhaled sharply, shaking her head. I hoped you'd see reason, but I should have known. She turned slightly, addressing the men behind her. Take T, kill Luciana. Bring my daughter home. And just like that, the standoff shattered. Luciana didn't hesitate. The moment Mrs. Bai gave the order, she pulled her gun and fired. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space, the bullet striking the shoulder of the nearest guard. Leah yanked T backward, ducking behind one of the cars as gunfire erupted around them. Adrenaline coursed through her veins, her mind racing. They were outnumbered. The guards were trained, ruthless, and efficient. Luciana was a good shot, but there were too many. We won't make it out like this. Leah's eyes darted around, searching for an opening. That's when she saw it. The garage control panel. If she could get to it, she could trigger the emergency lockdown. It wouldn't stop her mother's men for long, but it would buy them time. Luciana! She shouted over the gunfire. Cover me! Luciana didn't question it. She fired 2 more rounds, forcing the guards to take cover as Leah sprinted toward the panel. A shot whizzed past her ear, missing her by inches. Her heart slammed against her ribs, but she didn't stop. She reached the panel, slammed her hand against the emergency lockdown switch. The lights flickered red. An alarm blared. The massive steel security doors began to descend, cutting off the exit. The sudden shift threw the guards off, giving Luciana just enough time to grab T and pull him toward the nearest car. Leah, let's go. Luciana shouted. Leah turned, sprinting back toward them. But before she could reach them, a hand caught her wrist. Cold, firm, unyielding. Her mother. Leah, Mrs. Bai said, her voice still eerily calm despite the chaos around them. You don't have to do this. You're my daughter. This is where you belong. Leah looked into her mother's eyes, searching for something, anything, that made her the woman she had once admired. But all she saw was control, manipulation, and for the first time, Leah truly understood. I don't belong to you, she said. Then she twisted, wrenching her arm free, and ran. She reached the car just as Luciana revved the engine. The second she slammed the door shut, Luciana hit the gas, sending the vehicle screeching forward. The security doors sealed shut behind them. They were free. For now. T was unconscious in the back seat, his breathing ragged. Luciana kept her eyes on the road, speeding through the dark streets. Leah stared out the window, her mind a whirlwind. She had made her choice. She had turned her back on her mother, on everything she had ever known. But that didn't mean the fight was over. Mrs. Bai wouldn't stop. If anything, this was just the beginning. And Leah knew, deep in her bones, that she would have to face her again. The only question was, when? And when that time came, would she be ready? The car sped through the city, weaving between late-night traffic and neon-lit streets. The tires screeched against the pavement as Luciana took a sharp turn, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. Leah sat in the back seat, her hands pressing against T's wound, trying to stop the bleeding. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. Every bump in the road made him wince in pain. "Stay with me, T," she whispered, her voice thick with fear. "Just hold on." Luciana glanced at them through the rearview mirror. "We need to get him to a doctor fast." Leah nodded, her mind racing. "I know someone," she said. "He runs a private clinic downtown. Off the books. He won't ask questions." Luciana didn't hesitate. She swerved onto another road, accelerating toward their destination. But as they drove deeper into the city, Leah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Her mother wouldn't just let them go. Mrs. Bai was too powerful, too connected. The fact that they had escaped so easily didn't sit right with her. It felt like a trap. And she was right. The man in the shadows. At a dimly lit intersection, a black SUV pulled up to a stoplight, its tinted windows concealing the man inside. He watched the speeding car from a distance, his sharp eyes tracking every movement. A smirk tugged at his lips. "They got away." A voice crackled through his earpiece. He chuckled softly. Of course they did. There was no surprise, no concern in his tone. In fact, he sounded pleased. Because this was exactly what he had been waiting for. The fall of Mrs. Bai's empire had begun, and he was going to be the one to take over. "Follow them," he ordered. "Don't make a move yet. Let's see where they run." As the light turned green, the SUV merged into traffic, keeping a careful distance. The hunt had begun. The safe house. Luciana pulled into a dark alleyway, stopping outside a rundown brick building with no signs. The windows were blacked out, the door reinforced with steel. It didn't look like a clinic, but that was the point. Leah jumped out, helping Luciana carry tea toward the entrance. She banged on the metal door 3 times. A small slot slid open, revealing a pair of tired but sharp eyes. "Who's there?" "It's Leah." The man behind the door hesitated for a moment before unlocking it. "Get inside. Quick." The door swung open, and they rushed in, dragging tea toward the back room. The clinic was small but well-equipped. Medical tools lined the counters, and the faint smell of antiseptic filled the air. The doctor, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, grabbed a pair of gloves. "What the hell did you get yourself into this time, Leah?" "No time to explain," she said. "Just save him." He didn't ask any more questions. He never did. As the doctor got to work, Leah and Luciana stepped outside the room, their clothes stained with blood. Luciana exhaled, rubbing her temples. "We should lay low here for a while. Your mother's men will be searching the whole city." Leah leaned against the wall, exhausted. "She let us go too easily," she muttered. "She's planning something. I know it." Luciana nodded. "Yeah, but she's not the only one." Leah frowned. "What do you mean?" Luciana's expression darkened. "There's another player in this game. Someone we haven't seen yet. Someone powerful." Leah's stomach twisted. "Who?" Luciana glanced toward the door, lowering her voice. "I don't know his name, but I've heard rumors. A man who's been waiting for the right moment to take over. If Mrs. Bai's empire starts to fall, he'll be the one to claim it." Leah swallowed hard. As if they didn't have enough enemies already. He was still fighting for his life. Mrs. Bai was preparing her next move. And now, a new threat was lurking in the shadows. The battle for power in the city wasn't over. It was just beginning. The clinic was eerily quiet. The only sounds were the faint beeping of the monitors hooked up to T and the muffled conversations of the doctor and his assistant working to stabilize him. Leah sat in the corner of the room, exhaustion pressing down on her. Her mind was a battlefield of thoughts. They had escaped her mother, for now. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Mrs. Bai never lost. She always had a backup plan. Luciana leaned against the door, arms crossed. "We can't stay here forever." "I know," Leah murmured. "But where do we go?" Luciana's jaw tightened. "Somewhere she can't find us." Leah scoffed. "There's no such place." Before Luciana could respond, there was a sharp knock at the clinic's entrance. Both women exchanged glances. No one should have known they were here. Luciana immediately reached for her gun, moving toward the door. The doctor's assistant, a nervous young man, peeked at them from the hallway. "Someone's here asking for you." Leah stood up, her pulse quickening. Who? The assistant shook his head. I don't know, but he said if you don't come out, you'll regret it. Luciana's grip on her gun tightened. Sounds like a threat? Leah took a steady breath and nodded toward the door. Let's see what he wants. A message from the shadows. The air outside the clinic was thick with the smell of rain and gasoline. A single street lamp flickered overhead, casting a dim glow over the figure standing a few feet away. A man in a dark suit. Tall, lean, and motionless. His face was partially obscured by shadows, but his presence was impossible to ignore. Luciana kept her weapon close as they approached. Who are you? She demanded. The man tilted his head slightly. Not your enemy, he said, his voice calm and smooth. Not yet. Leah's fingers curled into fists. Then why are you here? The man studied her for a moment before reaching into his coat. Luciana raised her gun instantly. Move slow, she warned. The man smirked, unfazed, and pulled out a sleek, black envelope. He extended it toward Leah. This is for you. Leah hesitated, then took it. The paper felt expensive, smooth under her fingertips. She flipped it open. Inside was a single card. One word was printed in gold letters. Run. Leah's breath hitched. What is this? A warning, the man said simply. You think you're running from your mother, but there's someone else watching you. Someone worse. Luciana narrowed her eyes. Who? The man's smirk faded. The one who's been waiting for Mrs. Bai to fall. You've started a war, Leah. Leah's heart pounded. Then why warn me? The man stepped back, his gaze sharp. Because you still have a choice. Luciana raised a brow. And if we don't take your warning? The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then you won't live long enough to regret it. With that, he turned and disappeared into the night. Leah looked back at the card, her stomach twisting. They weren't just fighting her mother anymore. The real war had just begun.